The parking lot lights flickered against the coastal fog as 23-year-old Sarah Michelle Hartley locked her white Honda Civic and adjusted the strap of her leather messenger bag. It was 11:47 at night on October 16, 1999, and the Ocean View Diner in Monterey, California, was winding down its late shift. Sarah had stayed behind to help close, as she often did, her tips from the evening shift jingling in her apron pocket. The air smelled of salt and grease, that particular combination that clings to every coastal town diner, and the distant sound of waves crashing against the rocks provided a rhythm to the quiet night. She waved to her manager through the window, the neon sign casting red and blue shadows across her face, her auburn hair catching the light for just a moment. He waved back, turning to count the register, assuming she would walk the 3 blocks to her apartment as she had done 100 times before, but Sarah never made it home. Her car remained in that parking lot, keys still in the ignition, driver's door slightly ajar, and her messenger bag found the next morning on the ground beside it, contents spilled across the wet asphalt. In that bag, investigators would later find her tip money untouched, her house keys, a worn copy of Maya Angelou's poetry, and a photograph of her younger sister tucked into the front pocket. What they would not find, for nearly 6 years, was Sarah herself. If my story resonates with you, please hit the like button to bring a little light to this father's heart. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss my upcoming life stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching this video from and what time it is there right now. It makes me so happy to know what corner of the country or world you're listening from. Sarah Michelle Hartley was born on a crisp February morning in 1976 in Sacramento, California, to Margaret and Robert Hartley. She was the eldest of 3 children, a natural caretaker who helped raise her younger siblings while her parents worked long hours to keep their modest home. Friends described Sarah as someone who lit up every room she entered, a woman with dreams bigger than the small apartment she shared with 2 roommates in Monterey. She had moved to the coastal town 2 years earlier, drawn by the ocean and the promise of a fresh start after a difficult breakup. Sarah worked at Ocean View Diner, not because she lacked ambition, but because she was saving every dollar she could to enroll in nursing school at the local community college. Her co-workers loved her infectious laugh and the way she remembered every regular customer's name and order. The elderly man who came in every Tuesday for coffee and pie knew about her younger sister's upcoming wedding. The construction workers who stopped by for breakfast knew she was afraid of heights but dreamed of traveling to Ireland someday. Sarah was woven into the fabric of that small community, which made her disappearance all the more devastating. The fog had been particularly thick that October night, rolling in from the Pacific like a living thing, swallowing streetlights and muffling sound. Monterey in autumn carries a specific kind of darkness, where the tourist season has ended and the locals reclaim their town, but with it comes an isolation that can feel suffocating. Sarah had called her mother earlier that evening, as she did every Saturday without fail. Margaret Hartley would later tell investigators that her daughter sounded happy, excited even, talking about a nursing school information session she planned to attend the following week. There had been no indication of trouble, no mention of anyone bothering her at work, no hint of the terror that would unfold in just a few hours. When Sarah's roommate, Jennifer Chen, woke up Sunday morning and found Sarah's bed untouched, she initially wasn't worried. Sarah sometimes stayed overnight at her younger sister's place in nearby Salinas, but when Jennifer called Sarah's family and learned she wasn't there, a cold dread settled into her stomach. By noon, Sarah's parents had driven the 2 hours from Sacramento, and by 2 in the afternoon, they were filing a missing person report with the Monterey Police Department. Detective Raymond Torres caught the case that Sunday afternoon. A 20-year veteran of the force with salt and pepper hair and eyes that had seen too much, Torres had worked missing persons cases before, but something about the scene at Ocean View Diner troubled him immediately. Sarah's car sat in that parking lot like a monument to interrupted life. The keys in the ignition suggested she had either been startled or had planned to return immediately. The slightly open driver's door indicated she may have been pulled from the vehicle or had exited quickly. But what haunted Torres most was the messenger bag, its contents scattered deliberately as if someone had been searching for something or wanted to make the scene look like a robbery gone wrong. Yet the cash remained, $347 in small bills and coins untouched. Whatever had happened to Sarah Hartley, robbery wasn't the motive. Torres and his team canvassed the area immediately. The diner manager, Marcus Webb, a 48-year-old father of two, confirmed he had seen Sarah leave at approximately 11:45. He remembered because he had glanced at the clock while counting the drawer. He had waved to her through the window, watched her walk toward her car, then turned his attention back to closing procedures. He estimated he had been focused on the register for perhaps 10 minutes before locking up and leaving through the back entrance. That 10-minute window would become crucial. The parking lot had no security cameras in 1999, a detail that would prove catastrophic to the investigation. The nearest businesses were already closed for the night. The residential area across the street had few homes with direct views of the parking lot, and those residents reported seeing nothing unusual, though the fog had been so dense that visibility was severely limited. Meanwhile, Sarah's family began the agonizing process of waiting. Margaret Hartley set up command central in her daughter's apartment, with Jennifer's permission, covering the walls with maps and timelines and photographs. Robert Hartley, a quiet man who worked as an electrician, threw himself into the search with the methodical precision of his trade, organizing volunteer search parties that combed the beaches, forests, and rural areas surrounding Monterey. Sarah's younger sister, Rebecca, who was just 19 and should have been planning her wedding, instead spent her days making missing person flyers and posting them on every available surface in a 50-mile radius. The photograph they used showed Sarah at the beach the previous summer, her face tilted toward the sun, smiling that smile that made everyone who saw it want to know her. Beneath the photo, the text read, simple and stark. Missing, Sarah Michelle Hartley, last seen October 16, 1999. If you have any information, please contact Monterey Police Department. Within days, those flyers papered the Central California coast from Santa Cruz to Big Sur. Detective Torres pursued every lead with dogged determination. Sarah's ex-boyfriend, David Martinez, was interviewed extensively. They had dated for 2 years before Sarah moved to Monterey, and the breakup had been difficult but not violent. Martinez had a solid alibi. He was in Los Angeles that weekend at his cousin's wedding, confirmed by dozens of witnesses and photographs. Sarah's co-workers were questioned repeatedly. Marcus Webb took and passed a polygraph examination. The regular customers at the diner were tracked down and interviewed. Everyone painted the same picture of Sarah, kind, hard-working, beloved. No one could imagine who would want to hurt her. Torres expanded the investigation. He looked into recent crimes in the area, any pattern of violence against women, any similar disappearances. He found nothing that connected. He examined Sarah's finances, phone records, personal relationships. Everything was ordinary, heartbreakingly ordinary. She paid her bills on time, called her family regularly, had a small circle of close friends, and lived a quiet life focused on her goals. There were no secret relationships, no hidden debts, no involvement with drugs or criminal activity. Sarah Michelle Hartley was exactly who she appeared to be, a young woman trying to build a better future. The media attention came in waves. Initially, local news stations covered the story extensively. The image of Sarah's abandoned car, cordoned off with yellow police tape, became a symbol of every parent's nightmare. Vigils were held in downtown Monterey, hundreds of candles flickering in the darkness as the community came together to pray for Sarah's safe return. But as days turned into weeks with no new developments, the coverage began to fade. Other stories took precedence. Other tragedies demanded attention. By Thanksgiving, Sarah's case had been relegated to brief updates at the end of news broadcasts. By Christmas, it was mentioned rarely. Margaret Hartley kept Sarah's room exactly as it had been. She left the porch light on every single night, a beacon in case her daughter found her way home. Robert Hartley drove the route between the diner and Sarah's apartment countless times, looking for something, anything, that investigators might have missed. Rebecca postponed her wedding indefinitely. How could she celebrate when her sister was missing? The family existed in a state of suspended animation, unable to grieve because there was no body, unable to hope because the silence was so complete. Years passed with cruel slowness. The case went cold officially in 2001. though Detective Torres never stopped working it in whatever spare moments he could find. He kept Sarah's file on his desk, a constant reminder of the case that haunted him. In 2002, there was a false alarm when a body was discovered in Carmel, but it was not Sarah. In 2003, a psychic contacted the family claiming to have visions of Sarah's location, leading to an exhaustive search of a remote canyon that yielded nothing but broken hearts. In 2004, Torres retired from the police force, but he took copies of Sarah's case file with him, unwilling to let go. The Hartley family aged visibly under the weight of not knowing. Margaret's hair went completely white. Robert developed a tremor in his hands that doctors attributed to stress. Rebecca finally married in 2003, but the ceremony was subdued, marked by the empty chair reserved for Sarah. The extended family gathered for holidays, but there was always a ghost at the table, always a conversation that couldn't be had, always the unspoken question hanging in the air: what happened to Sarah? The Monterey community, too, was forever changed. Ocean View Diner installed security cameras. Women who worked late shifts began walking in groups. Parents held their daughters a little tighter. The parking lot where Sarah was last seen became an unofficial memorial, with people occasionally leaving flowers or notes near where her car had been found. But life, as it always does, moved forward. New families moved to town. Young people who had been children in 1999 grew up hearing the story of Sarah Hartley as a cautionary tale. The case became part of local law, a tragedy that defined an era. Detective Torres, in his retirement, became somewhat obsessed. He had worked hundreds of cases over his career, but Sarah's disappearance consumed him in a way nothing else had. Perhaps it was because there had been so little evidence, so few clues. Perhaps it was because he had made a promise to Margaret Hartley that he would find her daughter, a promise he felt he had failed to keep. He maintained contact with the family, calling every few months to check in, to let them know he hadn't forgotten. Margaret always thanked him, her voice heavy with exhaustion and stubborn hope. On the 5th anniversary of Sarah's disappearance, the Hartley family held another vigil in Monterey. Fewer people attended this time. The crowd had dwindled from hundreds to perhaps 50, mostly family and close friends who refused to let Sarah be forgotten. Margaret stood at the microphone, her hands shaking as she held a photograph of her daughter, and spoke words that would break even the hardest heart. Sarah would be 28 now, she said, her voice catching. She would have graduated from nursing school. She might be married. She might have made me a grandmother. Every day I think about all the moments she's missing. Every day I wonder if she's cold, if she's scared, if she's... Margaret couldn't finish the sentence. The unspoken end hung in the air. If she's alive. However, in 2005, everything changed. The Monterey Police Department, under pressure from cold case advocacy groups and Sarah's persistent family, agreed to reopen the investigation using new forensic technology that had become available. DNA analysis had advanced significantly since 1999, and there was hope that evidence collected from Sarah's car and personal belongings might yield new information. Detective Maria Santos, a younger investigator with a reputation for solving cold cases, was assigned to lead the reinvestigation. She approached the case with fresh eyes and modern tools, but also with immense respect for the work Torres had done before her. One of Santos's first actions was to have all physical evidence retested using updated DNA protocols. Sarah's messenger bag, her car's interior, and trace evidence collected from the parking lot were sent to the California Department of Justice laboratory for comprehensive analysis. Weeks passed with no results, and then months. The Hartley family's hope, which had flickered back to life with the case's reopening, began to dim once again. But Santos was methodical and patient. She re-interviewed everyone connected to the case, now 6 years older and perhaps more willing to share information they had previously withheld. She used geographic profiling techniques to analyze the location of Sarah's disappearance in relation to other crimes. She created a timeline so detailed it accounted for every minute of Sarah's last known day. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In October 2005, exactly 6 years after Sarah's disappearance, a hiker named Thomas Reynolds discovered human remains in a remote area of the Los Padres National Forest, approximately 40 miles south of Monterey. The remains were located in a dense thicket off a rarely used fire road, covered by years of accumulated leaves and brush. It was immediately clear to investigators that whoever had placed the body there had chosen the location carefully, somewhere unlikely to be discovered accidentally. The remains were transported to the coroner's office, and dental records confirmed what the Hartley family had feared but needed to know. The remains were those of Sarah Michelle Hartley. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation, and while decomposition and time had destroyed much potential evidence, the forensic team was able to recover crucial DNA material from the remains and from what was left of Sarah's clothing. The DNA was entered into CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, which maintains a database of DNA profiles from convicted offenders, arrestees, and unsolved crime scenes across the United States. Within 48 hours, there was a match. The name that came back sent shockwaves through the investigation: Christopher Allen Wade. Wade was a 41-year-old truck driver who had lived in Seaside, just a few miles from Monterey, in 1999. His DNA was in the system because he had been arrested in 2003 in Oregon for assault. When Detective Santos pulled Wade's background, a chilling pattern emerged. In 1998, a young woman in Sacramento had reported being followed by a man matching Wade's description, but the case had never been solved due to lack of evidence. In 2001, a woman in Eugene, Oregon, had been attacked in a parking lot late at night and barely escaped, but her attacker had worn a mask and she couldn't identify him. In 2003, Wade had been arrested for that Oregon assault, but had served only 18 months before being released. Now, in 2005, his DNA linked him definitively to Sarah Hartley's murder. Santos and her team moved quickly. They secured a warrant and arrested Wade at his apartment in Bakersfield, California, where he had been living since 2004. When they searched his residence, they found a trophy box hidden in the back of his closet. Inside were items belonging to multiple women: a bracelet, a driver's license, a watch, photographs. Among these items was Sarah's nursing school information packet, the one she had been so excited about, according to her mother's last phone call. The evidence was overwhelming. Wade had taken Sarah not just her life, but pieces of her dreams. Under interrogation, Christopher Wade initially denied everything, but when confronted with the DNA evidence and the items found in his possession, his story began to change. He claimed Sarah's death was an accident, that she had startled him while he was trying to steal from her car, that he had panicked. But the forensic evidence told a different story. The strangulation had been deliberate and sustained. Sarah had fought for her life, evident from defensive wounds on what remained of her hands. This was not an accident or a moment of panic. This was murder. As detectives dug deeper into Wade's life, they discovered he had been working as a delivery driver in 1999, with routes that took him through Monterey regularly. He would have been familiar with the Ocean View Diner, familiar with the patterns of the late-night staff. It became clear that he had been watching Sarah, possibly for days or even weeks, waiting for the right opportunity. The night of October 16th, with its thick fog and late hour, had provided him with that opportunity. What Wade didn't anticipate was how much Sarah's case would be pursued, how her family would never stop fighting, how technology would eventually catch up with him. He had thought he was clever, disposing of Sarah's body in a remote location, keeping his trophies hidden, moving to different states. But he hadn't counted on the persistence of those who loved Sarah Michelle Hartley. The trial of Christopher Allen Wade began in March 2006 and lasted 6 weeks. The Hartley family attended every single day, sitting in the front row of the courtroom, Margaret clutching the same photograph of Sarah she had held at every vigil. The prosecution built a meticulous case, presenting the DNA evidence, the timeline, the items found in Wade's possession, and testimony from experts about the manner of Sarah's death. The defense attempted to argue reasonable doubt, suggesting contamination of evidence or mishandling of the crime scene, but their arguments fell flat against the mountain of forensic evidence. Witnesses from Wade's past were called, women who testified about his disturbing behavior, his pattern of following women, his inability to accept rejection. A former girlfriend testified that Wade had once told her he fantasized about having complete control over a woman, a statement that took on horrifying significance in light of Sarah's murder. The jury heard recordings of Wade's interrogation, where his story changed multiple times, where he showed more concern for his own situation than any remorse for Sarah's death. They saw photographs of the items in his trophy box, each one representing a woman he had targeted or victimized. And they saw photographs of Sarah alive and vibrant and full of potential, contrasted with the clinical images of what Wade had reduced her to. Rebecca Hartley took the stand during the victim impact statement phase of the trial. She stood before the court, before Wade, who refused to meet her eyes, and she spoke about the sister she had lost. "Sarah was supposed to be my maid of honor," Rebecca said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "She was supposed to help me raise my children. She was supposed to grow old with me. Instead, I have an empty chair at my table and a hole in my heart that will never heal. You didn't just take my sister. You took my best friend, my confidant, my biggest cheerleader. You took the aunt my children will never know. You took my mother's firstborn child and my father's little girl. You took a woman who wanted to spend her life helping others, and you destroyed her for your own sick gratification. I hope you spend every day for the rest of your life thinking about what you did. I hope Sarah's face haunts your dreams. I hope you never know another moment of peace, because you made sure she never had another moment of life." The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of muffled crying. Even the judge had to pause to compose himself before the proceedings continued. Robert Hartley spoke next, and his words were fewer but carried equal weight. "I'm an electrician," he said simply. "I fix things. I solve problems. But I couldn't fix this. I couldn't solve this. For 6 years I drove myself mad trying to figure out where my daughter was, what had happened to her. You had the answer the whole time. You knew where she was while we searched. You knew she was dead while we hoped. You knew what you had done while we suffered. That makes you not just a murderer, but a coward and a monster." Margaret Hartley was the last to speak. She walked slowly to the stand, carrying with her a worn manila envelope. "These are letters," she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "Letters I wrote to Sarah over the past 6 years, one every week. I wrote to her about family gatherings, about the seasons changing, about books I read that I thought she'd like. I wrote about how much I missed her, how much I loved her, how I would never stop looking for her. I have 312 letters here, 312 weeks of not knowing if my daughter was dead or alive, suffering or safe. 312 weeks of that light on my porch being the only thing keeping me going, the thought that maybe, just maybe, she'd come home. You took that hope from me. You took my daughter, but you also took 6 years of my life, 6 years my husband will never get back, 6 years of my youngest daughter's joy. The death penalty exists for people like you, and I will be there when they execute it." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found Christopher Allen Wade guilty on all counts, first-degree murder, kidnapping, and multiple other charges related to items found in his trophy box that connected him to other crimes. When the verdict was read, Wade showed no emotion, but Margaret Hartley collapsed into her husband's arms, sobbing not with joy, but with the crushing weight of finally knowing, finally having justice, finally being able to lay her daughter to rest. The sentencing phase came 2 weeks later. The prosecution sought the death penalty, arguing that Wade's crime was particularly heinous, that he had shown no remorse, that the premeditated nature of the murder and his predatory behavior toward multiple women demonstrated he was a continuing threat to society. The defense argued for life in prison without parole, citing Wade's difficult childhood and claiming that death penalty was not justice, but revenge. The jury, after hearing all arguments, sentenced Christopher Allen Wade to death. He was transported to San Quentin State Prison to await execution, joining death row with hundreds of others, whose appeals would likely keep them alive for decades. For the Hartley family, the sentence provided a sense of closure, though they knew the appeals process meant Wade would live for many years to come. What mattered most was that he would never be free again, never able to hurt another woman, never able to escape accountability for what he had done to Sarah. Sarah Michelle Hartley was buried on a sunny day in May 2006, more than 6 years after she disappeared. The funeral was held in Sacramento, where she had grown up, and hundreds of people attended, far more than the family expected. Co-workers from Ocean View Diner came. Customers she had served came. People who had participated in the searches came. Detective Torres came, and so did Detective Santos. Strangers who had followed the case came, wanting to pay their respects to a young woman they had never met, but whose story had touched them deeply. Sarah was buried in a plot her parents had purchased, adjacent to their own future sites, ensuring that in death they would never be separated. The headstone they chose was simple granite engraved with her name, her dates, and a single line. She wanted to heal the world. Rebecca planted a rosebush at the gravesite, and Margaret placed a photograph of Sarah at the beach, the same one from the missing person flyers, now faded and worn, but still showing her daughter's bright smile. At the reception, following the funeral, people shared memories of Sarah. Marcus Webb, the diner manager, told stories about her kindness to difficult customers. Jennifer Chen, her roommate, talked about late-night conversations about dreams and futures. Elderly customers spoke about how Sarah always remembered their names, and through all of it, the Hartley family cried and laughed and remembered the woman Sarah had been, not just the victim she had become. The case of Sarah Hartley's murder brought about changes that extended beyond her family. The Ocean View Diner established a scholarship in Sarah's name for young women pursuing nursing degrees at Monterey Peninsula College. Every year, one student receives full tuition, books, and a stipend, allowing them to focus on their studies rather than working multiple jobs, as Sarah had done. Detective Santos used Sarah's case as an example in her training of younger investigators, emphasizing the importance of preserving evidence, maintaining meticulous records, and never giving up on cold cases even when they seem unsolvable. The Monterey Police Department upgraded their crime scene investigation protocols and installed security cameras in high-risk areas throughout the city. Margaret Hartley became an advocate for families of missing persons, speaking at conferences and support groups about the importance of hope, persistence, and self-care during the nightmare of having a missing loved one. She worked with California legislators to improve the state's missing persons database and to ensure that DNA evidence from cold cases was regularly retested as technology improved. Robert Hartley channeled his grief into action as well, organizing and leading volunteer search parties for other missing persons throughout California, using the organizational skills he had developed, searching for Sarah to help other families find their loved ones. Rebecca became involved with organizations supporting victims' families through the trial process, offering guidance based on her own experience navigating the criminal justice system. Christopher Wade remains on death row at San Quentin as of this writing, more than a decade after his conviction. He has filed multiple appeals, all of which have been denied. He has given several interviews from prison, each time telling a different version of events, none of which align with the forensic evidence. He claims he is innocent, that the DNA evidence was planted, that the items in his apartment belonged to someone else. He shows no genuine remorse, only self-pity and anger at being caught. The families of other women, those whose items were found in Wade's trophy box, have pursued their own cases against him. Some have resulted in additional convictions. Some remain unsolved, as Wade refuses to provide truthful information. Detective Torres, now in his 70s, still visits Margaret Hartley every year on the anniversary of Sarah's disappearance. They sit together on her porch, that light still burning, even though Sarah has come home in the only way she could. And they remember the young woman with auburn hair who wanted to be a nurse, who made everyone feel seen and valued, who deserved so much more than 23 years of life. Torres often tells Margaret that solving Sarah's case was the most important thing he ever did in his career, and Margaret always responds that Sarah would have been grateful to him for never giving up. The story of Sarah Michelle Hartley is one of tragedy and loss, but also of persistence and justice. It reminds us that behind every cold case statistic is a real person with dreams and family and friends who loved them. It reminds us that evil exists in the world, sometimes hiding in plain sight, and that vigilance and awareness are not paranoia, but wisdom. It reminds us that forensic science and dedicated investigators can bring answers even when years have passed, even when hope seems lost. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah's story reminds us of the preciousness and fragility of life. She was just 23 years old, walking to her car after a shift at work, doing something ordinary that millions of people do every day without incident. She had no way of knowing that someone had been watching her, waiting for her, planning to take from her everything she was and could be. The women reading this, hearing this, should know that Sarah's story, while heartbreaking, is also a call to awareness. Walk in groups when possible. Trust your instincts if something feels wrong. Tell people where you're going and when you'll be back. Install security measures. Look around parking lots before approaching your vehicle. These precautions don't guarantee safety, but they can reduce risk. And for parents, hold your children close. Tell them you love them. Have the difficult conversations about safety and awareness. Don't let fear paralyze them, but don't let complacency endanger them. The Hartley family continues to gather every October 16th at Sarah's grave. They bring flowers, usually roses, and they spend the day together remembering. Margaret still writes letters to Sarah, though she doesn't mail them anymore. She writes about her grandchildren, Rebecca's 3 kids, who grew up hearing stories about their Aunt Sarah, who visit her grave and leave drawings and flowers. She writes about Robert's retirement, about how they've traveled some now that they're older, always bringing back something for Sarah's grave from each trip. She writes about how the pain has changed over the years, never diminishing but becoming something they've learned to carry, like a permanent weight that they've grown strong enough to bear. She writes about justice, about how knowing what happened and seeing Wade imprisoned has brought a measure of peace, even as it can never bring their daughter back. And she writes about hope, about how Sarah's scholarship has helped 37 young women become nurses so far, about how each of them carries a piece of Sarah's dream forward into the world. Margaret writes about the day, distant but inevitable, when she and Robert will join Sarah in that cemetery plot, and how that thought brings her comfort rather than fear, knowing they'll be reunited with their daughter after so many years apart. On clear nights in Monterey when the fog lifts and the stars are visible, some people say they think of Sarah Hartley when they pass the Ocean View Diner. The parking lot looks different now with its bright security lights and cameras, but the memory remains. Locals sometimes leave flowers near where her car was found on the anniversary of her disappearance. The diner itself has changed hands, but the new owners kept the small plaque inside that commemorates Sarah and reminds employees and customers alike about the importance of community and safety. Nursing students at Monterey Peninsula College who receive Sarah's scholarship often visit her grave to thank her, to tell her about their studies, to promise they'll honor her memory by being the kind of nurse she would have been, compassionate, dedicated, and truly caring about the people they serve. Some of them have gone on to work in hospitals where they've saved lives, where they've comforted dying patients, where they've made a difference in ways Sarah never got the chance to do. But through them, Sarah's dream lives on, multiplied and magnified, touching lives she never met in ways she never imagined. Justice for Sarah Michelle Hartley came slowly and at tremendous cost. 6 years of not knowing, 6 years of searching and hoping and fearing. 6 years of Christopher Wade living free while Sarah lay hidden in the forest. But justice did come, and that matters. It matters to her family, who can finally rest knowing their daughter's killer will never walk free again. It matters to the community, who can feel safer knowing a predator was caught and imprisoned. It matters to other victims and their families who see that cold cases can be solved, that persistence pays off, that their loved ones are not forgotten. And it matters to Sarah herself, wherever she is now, free from the pain and fear of her final moments, her memory preserved not just as a victim, but as a fully realized person who lived and loved and dreamed and mattered. The fog still rolls into Monterey on October nights, thick and mysterious, swallowing the coast in grey silence. But now when it comes, the people who remember Sarah don't just feel fear, they feel resolve. They feel the strength of a community that came together. They feel the love of a family that never gave up. They feel the dedication of investigators who worked tirelessly for justice. And they feel Sarah's presence, not as a ghost or a haunting, but as a reminder of the preciousness of every ordinary moment, every walk to a car after work, every phone call home to say goodnight. Sarah Michelle Hartley deserved to live a long and beautiful life. She deserved to become a nurse, to help people, to marry and have children, to grow old surrounded by love. She deserved all the ordinary magic that makes life worth living. Christopher Wade took that from her, but he could not take her memory, her impact, or her legacy. Those live on, carried forward by everyone who knew her, everyone who searched for her, everyone who fought for justice on her behalf, and everyone who hears her story and resolves to honor her memory by living fully, loving fiercely, and never taking a single moment for granted.